Ever since I took over as the caretaker at Highgate Cemetery, I felt a strange presence around me. I'm Martin, in my late 30s, and every foggy night the ancient gravestones whispered secrets that only I seemed to hear. I always thought those soft murmurs were tricks of my imagination. Until one eerie evening when the whispers turned into clear, chilling words and ghostly silhouettes began to appear. In that heart-stopping moment, I realized my life was about to change forever, plunging me into a mystery rooted deep in the dark history of this sacred ground. I still remember the night it all began. I was making my usual rounds at Highgate Cemetery when the wind carried not just a chill but words that I could barely decipher. Each step I took between the time-worn headstones was accompanied by a soft murmur, as if unseen souls were urging me closer. The fog was so thick that even the familiar outlines of the graves turned into mysterious shadows, and I felt an inexplicable pull that I couldn't resist. As I walked along the narrow, winding paths, the whispers grew louder and formed strange, broken sentences. I paused in front of an old family plot and tried to steady my racing heart. I recalled the tales the locals had shared over pints at the nearby pub, stories of restless spirits and unresolved tragedies. Yet, I had always dismissed them as mere legend. That night, however, every creak of the iron gate and rustle of dried leaves felt loaded with meaning. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn to a particular monument, its weathered stone almost beckoning me with a silent urgency. My hands trembled as I reached out to trace the worn carvings, wondering if they held the key to the voices that haunted me. In that moment, I realized that the cemetery was no longer a quiet resting place, but a stage for an ancient, unresolved injustice that would soon engulf my very soul. In the days that followed, the eerie events at Highgate continued to escalate. I began noticing that the whispering wasn't random. It seemed to repeat a pattern, almost like a desperate plea for help. Determined to uncover the truth, I spent hours combing through old records at the local library in London, piecing together forgotten histories of the cemetery's past. I discovered that many of the graves belonged to victims of a long-ago injustice, a crime that had left souls restless and bitter. Late one evening, while reviewing a dusty journal left behind by a previous caretaker, I found detailed notes about an old ritual meant to pacify these wandering spirits. The entries described symbols etched into tombstones, secret gatherings beneath the full moon, and a ritual that could free the condemned if performed correctly. Though the language was simple, each word carried an air of urgency that sent shivers down my spine. I realized that the answers I sought were hidden in these cryptic writings. I couldn't help but feel both terrified and driven by a strange sense of duty. The journal hinted that the spirits were not malevolent by nature. They were victims of circumstance, trapped by a betrayal that history had nearly forgotten. I decided that if I was to put an end to the growing terror, I would have to reassemble the pieces of that ancient ritual, even if it meant facing supernatural forces that defied reason and logic. With every tick of the clock, the weight of history and the call for justice pressed harder on my soul. Night after night, the atmosphere at Highgate became even more oppressive. I began to see vague figures wandering among the graves, their forms flickering in and out of the mist. One fateful night, as I performed my routine maintenance, I witnessed a figure standing near an old mausoleum, a gaunt, sorrowful face that seemed to plead silently for redemption. I approached slowly, heart pounding, as the figure faded into the darkness before I could speak. It was as if the spirit was warning me, or perhaps inviting me to unlock the cemetery's secrets. My investigation took on a personal urgency as the supernatural occurrences grew bolder. The whispers were no longer subtle. They erupted into fragmented sentences, warning me of a dire fate should I meddle with forces beyond my understanding. I found myself torn between the rational mind that urged caution and the desperate need to bring peace to the long-forgotten souls. Every night I combed through the ancient graveyard, searching for further clues, each step echoing with memories of past tragedies and the constant reminder of my own fragile mortality. One evening, I uncovered an inscription hidden beneath a crumbling stone, a cryptic message that tied the ritual to a secret meeting place in a nearby village. The discovery was both a breakthrough and a new source of terror. I was now entangled in a mystery that spanned generations. The more I learned, the more I felt the cold grip of the past closing in around me. It became clear that to end the cycle of torment, I would have to face not only the ghosts of Highgate, but also the dark legacy of those who had once wronged them. The final night arrived with an almost tangible dread in the air. Armed with the clues from the journal and the hidden inscription, I prepared to perform the long-forgotten ritual beneath the light of a full, pale moon. Standing alone in a secluded clearing behind the cemetery, I arranged the symbolic objects as described in the ancient text. My hands shook, and my heart raced as I whispered the simple incantations, trying to steady my voice against the rising tide of fear. Every shadow seemed to shift with life, and I felt the weight of unseen eyes watching my every move. In the midst of the ritual, the atmosphere exploded with an energy I could neither explain nor control. The murmurs turned into a chorus of sorrowful wails, and the ground trembled as spectral forms materialized around me. For a brief, terrifying moment, I saw them clearly. Faces twisted in anguish, eyes filled with despair, each soul yearning for the justice long denied. It was then that I understood. The ritual was not merely a means to free them, but a test of my own resolve, a passage into a realm where human fear and ancient evil intertwined. As the climax of the ritual neared, I felt a presence loom over me, a dark, towering figure whose eyes burned with an unholy light. In that final, heart-stopping instant, I realized that the forces I had awakened would not let go without a fight. The struggle was no longer just about releasing the trapped souls. It was about saving my own. With every ounce of courage I could muster, I fought against the encroaching darkness, praying that my desperate act of defiance might finally restore peace to Highgate Cemetery and end the cycle of haunting terror that had consumed my life. Ever since I began my journey as an urban legends investigator, I never expected my next case to pull me so deep into terror. I'm Ava, a young researcher in my late 20s, and my curiosity led me to St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 in New Orleans, a place steeped in mystery and local lore. The moment I stepped through the iron gate, I felt a chill running down my spine as faint voices echoed among the tombstones. I couldn't shake the feeling that buried secrets and forgotten betrayals were waiting to be uncovered, setting me on a path into a nightmare older than time. I still recall my first evening at the cemetery as if it were yesterday. I wandered through the narrow, winding paths between aged gravestones, each one telling a story of loss and sorrow. The humid air of New Orleans mixed with a mysterious chill that didn't belong to the warm summer nights I was used to. Every step I took, I heard soft murmurs, barely audible at first, like gentle whispers blending with the rustling of old cypress trees. I had come here to find truth in urban myths, but instead, I sensed that every stone and shadow held secrets that reached out for me. As I moved deeper into the graveyard, the whispers grew into fragments of words that made my heart race. I paused, in front of a grand tomb marked by intricate carvings, the kind of detail that spoke of a forgotten era. Locals often shared stories at nearby diners about vengeful spirits and long-buried crimes, yet I had always dismissed them as exaggerations. That night, the murmurs were impossible to ignore. I pressed my hand against the cold stone, trying to decipher the meaning behind the echoes of sorrow that seemed to beg for recognition. The atmosphere turned oppressive as I noted how the moonlight struggled to break through thick, swirling mist. Every sound, the creak of a rusted gate, the distant call of a night bird, added to the sense that I was not alone. My instincts warned me that I was stepping into a narrative far beyond simple ghost stories. With every moment, the cemetery revealed itself as a living archive of betrayal and hidden violence, and I felt a growing determination to unveil the dark truth lurking beneath centuries of silence. In the days that followed, I dove headfirst into research, determined to piece together the stories hidden in every weathered gravestone. I spent long hours in local archives and chatted with elderly residents over cups of strong coffee at neighborhood cafes. They spoke in hushed tones about grim tales of treachery and ruthless murders, stories that had been passed down like forbidden secrets. I learned that many tombs belonged to victims of brutal betrayals, their final moments captured only in the soft, desperate whispers that haunted the cemetery's corridors. Late one rainy evening, I discovered an old ledger in the records of a small New Orleans historical society. The faded pages recounted events of a long-forgotten era, a time when greed and revenge ruled over families torn apart by deceit. The entries hinted at clandestine meetings held under the cover of darkness, where confessions of betrayal were etched into the hearts of those condemned. Each word in the ledger sent a chill through me, as if the past was reaching out with a spectral hand. I began to connect these fragments of history to the murmurs I had heard, convinced that the cemetery itself was a battleground of unresolved crimes. My nights grew restless as visions of forlorn faces and anguished cries began to intrude on my sleep. Every whisper seemed to call my name, urging me to unlock their stories before they vanished into oblivion. I felt an unexplainable pull to return to the cemetery, to stand in the midst of its silent witnesses, and to let the voices of the past guide me. In that liminal space between night and dawn, I understood that uncovering these hidden transgressions was not merely about solving a mystery. It was about confronting the restless souls trapped by their own tragic histories. Night by night, the cemetery revealed darker layers of its secret past. While on one of my solitary excursions, I encountered a chilling sight. A lone figure standing beside a weathered mausoleum, its presence marked by an aura of despair. The figure, bathed in the eerie glow of a street lamp, seemed to beckon me closer with silent urgency. I remember feeling both dread and a strange compassion as I approached, wondering if this apparition was one of the betrayed souls or a warning of the horrors that lay ahead. The experience shook me to the core, leaving me to question the boundary between myth and reality. Driven by a mix of fear and determination, I began to map out the cemetery's history using clues gleaned from whispered legends and forgotten documents. Each step uncovered evidence of deep-rooted treachery, a series of brutal murders and cunning betrayals that spanned generations. I discovered that many of the graves held secrets of unspoken deals and vendettas that had poisoned families for decades. It was as if the cemetery itself was a vault of the darkest human emotions, where every monument was a relic of pain and the constant reminder of a past that refused to die quietly. One particularly stormy night, while inspecting a neglected section of the graveyard, I found an inscription hidden beneath a collapsed headstone. The message, though worn by time, screamed of vengeance and sorrow. In that moment, the fragmented whispers converged into a coherent plea, a confession from a long-forgotten traitor seeking redemption. I felt an irresistible urgency to follow this thread, even as it threatened to drag me into a vortex of peril. The cemetery was no longer just a resting place. It had become a portal to a sinister narrative that was determined to pull me into its dark embrace. The final phase of my investigation began on a night when the air itself seemed to tremble with anticipation. Armed with the ledger's secrets and the chilling inscription, I returned to the heart of the cemetery with a resolve that belied my pounding heart. I set up my equipment near a cluster of ancient tombs, determined to capture the voices that had haunted my every step. The humid night air mixed with a palpable sense of dread, as if the very ground beneath me was holding its breath in expectation of what was to come. As midnight approached, the whispers grew louder and more insistent, echoing around me like a chorus of lost souls. I recorded every sound, every broken word, and suddenly the air shifted. The faint outlines of figures emerged from the shadows. They moved slowly, their faces etched with anguish and betrayal, as if they were searching for closure in the realm of the living. In that haunting moment, I realized that my role was not merely that of an observer, but that of a mediator between a past steeped in cruelty and a present desperate for justice. In the climax of that eerie night, the spectral forms converged around me, and I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. It was as if the cemetery itself was urging me to complete the cycle of confessions and secrets. With trembling determination, I whispered the words of the forgotten ritual I had pieced together from the ledger and the inscription. The night erupted in a final, spine-chilling symphony of sorrow and relief, leaving me with a deep, lingering understanding. Some truths are too painful to be buried, and some spirits, once awakened, will forever change the living. Ever since I took on this case, I never imagined that the secrets of the cemetery would be so deeply intertwined with my own troubled past. I'm Jake, a private detective marked by old scars, and my latest assignment led me to a notorious cemetery in rural Louisiana, a place where unexplained disappearances and eerie whispers abound. The moment I stepped through its creaking iron gates, I felt the weight of unseen eyes and sensed that every tomb held a dark memory waiting to be uncovered. I remember the first night I arrived at the cemetery like it was etched in my memory. I had been hired to investigate a series of mysterious vanishings, and every lead pointed to this neglected burial ground outside Baton Rouge. The humid southern air clung to me as I wandered between weathered headstones and gnarled oak trees, their branches swaying in a ghostly rhythm. Whispers, soft yet insistent, seemed to ripple from the ground itself, making me question if these were merely the wind or the voices of lost souls desperate to be heard. As I continued my investigation, the atmosphere grew heavier with each step. I passed by crumbling mausoleums and forgotten crypts, each bearing marks of time and untold stories. Locals had long warned of a dark cult that once used these grounds for forbidden rituals, but I had dismissed those tales until the murmurs began to form words. I pressed my hand against a cold, moss-covered stone, feeling a chill that wasn't just from the night air, and wondered if the secrets hidden here were linked to the disappearances I was meant to solve. My heart pounded as I recorded every sound and shadow that danced under the flickering light of my lantern. The cemetery, steeped in tragedy and mystery, felt alive with a malevolent energy. I sensed that each whisper and every rustle in the dark was a clue, a silent testimony of past sins. With determination mounting inside me, I vowed to piece together the puzzle of vanished souls, even if it meant facing horrors that defied logic and might reveal a part of my own destiny I had long tried to forget. In the following days, I immersed myself in local records and dusty archives, determined to uncover the cemetery's hidden history. I spent hours at a small library in Baton Rouge, poring over old newspaper clippings and faded photographs that spoke of unspeakable crimes and mysterious cult activities. The deeper I dug, the more I learned about ritualistic gatherings and secret ceremonies that had once taken place under a blood-red moon. Every document hinted at an ancient power and a vengeance that refused to fade away with time. One stormy evening, while sifting through an old ledger from a local historical society, I discovered detailed accounts of a clandestine cult. The faded handwriting described ritual sacrifices and chants meant to appease an otherworldly force. The ledger mentioned several victims, people who had visited the cemetery before vanishing without a trace. As I read on, a cold shiver ran down my spine. It became evident that the voices I had heard among the tombstones were not random, but were the echoes of those who had suffered under this cult's dark influence. Haunted by the ledger's revelations, I returned to the cemetery armed with a new sense of urgency. I retraced my steps, noting symbols etched subtly into the stone and overgrown pathways that led to hidden corners of the graveyard. The whispers now seemed to direct me toward a specific section near a centuries-old family plot. Each step I took was laden with dread and anticipation, as if the very ground was conspiring to lead me into a trap. I knew that unraveling this mystery would force me to confront not just the horrors of the past, but also the shadows lingering in my own soul. Nightfall brought a suffocating darkness that cloaked the cemetery in an almost tangible despair. On one particularly oppressive evening, while re-examining the area indicated by the ledger, I saw something that stopped me in my tracks, a figure standing silently by an ancient crypt. The figure was shrouded in tattered garments, and its eyes glimmered with an eerie light, as if it held all the secrets of the night. I felt an overwhelming mix of fear and empathy, wondering if this apparition was a victim or a harbinger of the unspeakable horrors yet to come. Driven by equal parts dread and determination, I began to document every anomaly. I took slow, measured steps towards the spectral presence, my hand shaking as I fumbled with my recorder. The figure did not speak, yet its presence conveyed a deep sorrow and an unspoken warning. I recalled the ledger's accounts of ritualistic ceremonies and betrayed souls, and I wondered if the apparition was one of those lost to the cult's dark deeds. The encounter left me reeling, and I realized that my investigation was no longer just about solving a case. It was a descent into a nightmare where the line between the living and the dead blurred. As I left the crypt, the whispers intensified, weaving together fragmented confessions of pain and retribution. Each tombstone I passed now seemed to pulse with the echoes of a forgotten ritual, and I felt an urgent need to decipher their cryptic messages. The cemetery was not merely a resting place for the dead. It was a living archive of betrayal and despair, and I was now a reluctant guardian of its secrets. With each step, I sensed that the cult's legacy was drawing me closer to a confrontation with a darkness that could shatter the boundaries of my sanity. The final stage of my investigation began on a night when the full moon cast long, sinister shadows over the cemetery. Determined to confront the source of the eerie whispers, I returned to the heart of the graveyard, where the ledger had hinted the cult once performed their macabre rituals. I prepared my equipment and steadied my nerves, feeling the oppressive energy of the land pressing down on me. Every rustle of leaves and every creak of ancient wood resonated like a warning, urging me to turn back. Yet my resolve only hardened. At the stroke of midnight, the atmosphere shifted as if the cemetery itself had awakened. The whispers grew into a cacophony of tormented voices, and from the darkness emerged several spectral figures, their faces contorted with anguish. I set up my recorder and watched in disbelief as the apparitions circled me, each one exuding an aura of both sorrow and vengefulness. It was then that I realized the cult's dark legacy was not only responsible for the disappearances, but was also bound to the very fabric of this haunted place, and perhaps to my own fate. In that final harrowing moment, as the spectral forms closed in and the air crackled with an unholy energy, I recited the incantation I had pieced together from the old ledger and cryptic inscriptions. The night exploded in a maelstrom of sound and light, and I felt an overwhelming surge of power and despair. The voices merged into one anguished cry, and for a fleeting moment I understood that the cemetery was a portal, a place where the past and present collided in a relentless quest for justice and retribution. The experience left me forever changed, marked by the knowledge that some secrets, once unearthed, can never be reburied. Thank you very much for watching today's video. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to stay informed when the next video comes out. And tell me, what did you think of today's stories? See you in the next video.